From No Mercy on the N64 to the SmackDown vs. Raw series to 2K's recent efforts, WWE video games are always a total blast. Well, except for 2K20, that was just a train wreck from start to finish. With so many titles out there, you would have thought that every single major star would have made an appearance in digital form. Well, dear viewer, at least 10 of them haven't, otherwise we wouldn't have a list. But before we start, we are only counting official WWE released console games, so no arcade games and no mobile games like Supercard or WWE Champions. Sorry, DSP. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 biggest stars to never be in a WWE video game. Join us. Number 10, Giant Gonzalez. Whether as Giant Gonzalez in WWE or El Gigante in WCW, there is one thing you can say about Jorge Gonzalez. He was very tall. Aside from his astounding height, Gonzalez had pretty much nothing going for him between the ropes. He couldn't bump, he couldn't sell, he could barely walk convincingly, and yet he was gainfully employed by several of the world's top wrestling companies. The big man is perhaps most famous for his match against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 9. Despite being a victim of the legendary streak, WWE have made absolutely no effort to immortalize Gonzalez in game form. Wrestling games have been pretty generous towards lumbering giants in the past, so there was definitely scope for them to do the same with this one. He may have only been on WWE's books for less than a year, but Gonzalez actually has a glittering career to draw from. Over the course of his career, he shared the ring with the likes of Ric Flair, Sting, and other legends. That said, I'm not quite sure how his finisher of using a chloroform-soaked rag would translate into a game engine. Number 9, James Ellsworth. Before you get on our case about how James Ellsworth wasn't a big star, let me remind you that he holds several victories over AJ Styles and turned heel in the main event of a WWE pay-per-view. You know who else did that? Stone Cold Steve Austin, so there. After first appearing as a jobber for Braun Strowman to consume whole, the Chinless Wonder started appearing regularly on SmackDown as part of Dean Ambrose's feud with the Phenomenal One. After turning bad, Ellsworth would join up with Carmella and serve as her valet/pet during her big push in 2017. He also won the first ever Women's Money in the Bank ladder match, but we really don't need to cover that travesty again. Ellsworth was featured on WWE TV from 2016 to 2018, giving him a decent window to get into a game. However, this never happened, not even as a manager. I mean, you would have thought he would have been a game developer's dream. I mean, his head is basically just one giant polygon. Number 8, Zach Gowan. In 2003, one-legged wrestler Zach Gowan was signed to a WWE contract. Mind you, this was only after John Laurinaitis accidentally tried to sign a different one-legged wrestler by mistake. Anyway, with that faux pas out of the way, Gowan was free to embark on his journey as a WWE superstar. This was a journey that included a feud with Mr. McMahon, getting his prosthetic leg pulled off by Roddy Piper, and getting chucked down some stairs by Brock Lesnar. The games he could have realistically been on were WrestleMania 19 for the GameCube, which would have already been in development when he joined, and Survivor Series, which was a Game Boy Advance game with limited capacity. Still, it would have been really interesting to see how Gowan's unique wrestling style would have translated to a video game format. Number 7, the Patriots. Del Wilkes, aka the Patriots, aka that guy that had Kurt Angle's music before Kurt Angle did, made his name in various promotions across the US and Japan before rocking up in the World Wrestling Federation just as it was ticking over into the Attitude Era. A masked man with an undying love for all things Murica, the Patriot debuted as the perfect opponent for Bret Hart during his Yay Canada, Boo USA gimmick in 1997. Wilkes was even given a WWE Championship match against Hart at the Ground Zero pay-per-view and was scheduled to face Team Canada at Survivor Series 97 before a torn triceps put the kibosh on that. That injury ultimately forced Wilkes to retire, but it did also pave the way for the debut of Steve Blackman, so you know, swings and roundabouts. The criminally underrated WWE 13 featured a mode that took players through the Attitude Era, letting them play in key matches between SummerSlam 97 and WrestleMania 15. This would have been a great way to get the Patriot in a game, but sadly Ground Zero was absent from this mode. You mean they didn't include Max Mini versus El Torito? Shame on them all. Number 6, Rocky Johnson. To some fans, Soul Man Rocky Johnson's greatest contribution to wrestling was siring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. However, those fans are fools, because outside of helping to create one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Johnson was also a more than accomplished wrestler in his own right. Alongside Tony Atlas, he captured the World Tag Team Championships in 1983, the duo becoming the first black athletes to do so. Rocky played a huge role in breaking down racial barriers in wrestling, and his achievements were recognized with a WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2008. If the company wanted to add to his legacy with a game appearance, there is a couple of ways they could do it. One would be to have a mode showcasing the notable achievements of black wrestlers throughout history, which could contain the match where Johnson and Atlas won the titles. The other could be as a feature at the end of a Rock Showcase mode, a bonus match to show how important his father was to the Great One. Listen, if you want my CV 2K, just drop me an email. Number 5, Bull Nakano. One of the women responsible for just about keeping her division alive during the early 90s was Medusa, aka Alundra Blaze. WWE finally acknowledged her accomplishments by including her in 2K16. She was also in 2 WCW games, including the utterly dreadful Backstage Assault. Now all that WWE need to do is put some of the wrestlers that Blaze faced during those years, and they can start with the legendary Japanese star Bull Nakano. After rising up the ranks in All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, Nakano debuted for WWE in a major way when she aligned with Luna to take on Blaze at SummerSlam 1994. Fun fact, this was also the first ever women's match to take place at SummerSlam, the more you know. A history of women's wrestling showcase mode would have to include the SummerSlam 94 match in it, which would be a fantastic way to let players finally control the Japanese icon. Hey, it could also feature the match where Nakano beats Blaze to win the women's title, which I mainly want to see included because it took place at an event called Big Egg Wrestling Universe, which is hilarious, obviously. Number 4, Juventud Guerrera. Did you know that Juventud Guerrera means youth warrior in Spanish? And that is pretty accurate. The guy hasn't aged a day since 1998. A pillar of WCW's excellent cruiserweight division, Juvi mixed it up with some of the best lightweights in the world throughout the 90s. Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, Jushin Thunder Liger, Guerrera battled them all and looked pretty damn good whilst doing it. He would jump over to WWE in 2005 to join the Mexicools alongside Super Crazy and Psychosis. There are plenty of ways to get Juvi into a WWE video game, but a WCW Cruiserweight showcase would be epic and would have to feature the Juice in some form or another. WWE had the chance to include this man in the Rey Mysterio showcase from 2K22, but unfortunately we are still waiting for the chance to hit our friends with a virtual Juvi driver. Number 3, Dynamite Kid. Technically, Dynamite Kid main evented WrestleMania 2. Well, sort of. In reality, he main evented 1/3 of that cursed show, but it was a big match nonetheless. Teaming up with Davey Boy Smith, Kid defeated Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake to win the World Tag Team Championships with Ozzy Osbourne at their side. Bulldog made his in-game debut back in 1992 for Super WrestleMania for the SNES and Mega Drive and has appeared in plenty more games since then. As for Dynamite Kid, not a chance. The thing about this talented high flyer is that most of his greatest achievements came outside of WWE. His legendary matches with Tiger Mask took place in New Japan in the early 1980s, as did a lot of other matches he had that helped shape cruiserweight wrestling. He hasn't even been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, which may or may not have something to do with his reputation and behavior outside of the squared circle. One of the most underrated and innovative wrestlers of all time, fans of Dynamite Kid would love nothing more than to soar through the air as his character in a modern video game. That said, I don't see it happening anytime soon. Number 2, Bob Backlund. Former WWE champion, presidential candidate, and certified crazy bastard, Bob Backlund is one of the most intriguing figures in pro wrestling history. A clean-cut All-American boy, a younger Backlund was effectively selected as the successor to Bruno Sammartino and carried the company as its champion out of the 70s and into the 80s. Then, after a gap of over a decade, he won the WWE title again by beating Bret Hart of all people at Survivor Series 1994. He would then lose the title 3 days later in an 8-second squash against Diesel. As Vince McMahon would say, what a ride! How Backlund hasn't turned up in a single WWE video game across his long and eclectic career is actually pretty impressive. He hasn't even appeared as a manager, which does a serious disservice to that time he tried to make Darren Young great again. Whilst he may not be so popular with younger fans today, older nerds like me would love to have the opportunity to lock in the cross-faced chicken wing in video game form. Number 1, Superstar Billy Graham. Hulk Hogan has been in more WWE video games than I've had compliments in the comments section. And really, it is a crime that the Hulkster has been in so many games whilst one of his biggest inspirations has never graced a single one. Superstar Billy Graham did so much for the way that heels are presented in wrestling. An arrogant bad guy with a body chiseled out of marble, Graham was one of the most popular wrestlers around back in the 1970s despite being a villain. He also had dyed blonde hair, a moustache, and said brother a lot. Remind you of anyone? In 1977, Graham unseated Bruno Sammartino to become just the 6th different WWE champion in history. He would hold the gold for the best part of a year before dropping it to our old friend Bob Backlund. WWE have included older wrestlers like Sammartino in newer games, so they could definitely do the same for both Graham and Backlund. Though in Graham's case, some of his comments about the company in various shoot interviews might be the thing that's preventing this from happening. Anyway, putting these old-timers in games would be a great way to grow their popularity amongst younger fans and shed some light on an oft-overlooked portion of WWE history.